Here we go again, folks. This is going to be awesome. This is part one of a series of amazing vlogs where, with the help of my fictional family court training character, Mrs. Abigail Groves, we are going to show you, yes you as the resident parent, how to write a totally amazing statement of absolute hate with spurious claims based on only your expressed truth, feelings, emotions and perceptions, with absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support what you are actually saying. Yes, Abigail and I will be showing you how to turn only a handful of arguably very minor and subjective behaviours alleged against her separated husband, Mr. Matthew Groves, into drama, fears, concerns, anxieties, expressions of harm, abuse and coercive control. This is like Viagra for the family courts. It's like giving the family court one big boner with all their family court juices flowing. So, let's meet Mrs. Abigail Groves, and here she is. Abigail separated from her husband, Mr. Matthew Groves, 3 months ago, and she has denied him access to their daughter Sandy, who is 4 years of age. Mr. Groves has applied for a child arrangements order seeking 50-50 shared care contact. What? 50-50 shared care contact? Abigail Groves is outraged, fuming, incandescent with hate. After all, her fairy princess dream, when she put on her wedding dress, has come crashing to an end after only 8 years of marriage, and now her ex, Mr. Matthew Groves, who on separation obviously turned into a sociopathic narcissist, wants half of her daughter, which would also mean that she wouldn't get any child maintenance. No way, Jose. Her mummy genes are going ballistic. She will fight to the death to stop that, and the best way of doing that is to turn into a spiteful, vindictive, emotionally driven, hateful resident parent. Luckily for Abigail, she has contacted a family lawyer who can help her and knows exactly how to throw Mr. Groves under the family court bus just by writing a statement of feelings, emotions and perceptions with absolutely no evidence needed whatsoever. The intention of Abigail is clear: to deny, restrict, minimise the contact between her ex and her beloved daughter Sandy, to promote hysteria and exact her revenge, hurt feelings, fake woke victimhood and irrational emotions. With the help of her sick family lawyer, she's going to put Mr. Groves into the hurt locker, a world of pain, trauma, torture and hopefully, as a family court bonus, to destroy his mental health and career. Now, Abigail Groves and I, right from the outset, invite you to download and read her statement that her sick lawyer, who has no duty of care to any child, has helped her to write. Abigail has asked me to go through this statement with you, which of course I'm delighted to do. You can download the statement by clicking on the link in the description section or at www.philsvlogs.co.uk. So, whilst you download this amazing masterclass in family court hate, let me run my excellent introduction. I am Philip Kedge, a retired police chief inspector, the director of the Mckenzie Friend UK network and founder of the national campaign of #LightNotHate to rescue you from the hands of destructive family lawyers who all too often stir the pot of acrimony and hate for financial gain, engage in thousands of pounds of totally unnecessary work, leave people in crippling lifelong debt and have absolutely no professional duty of care to any child. How disgraceful is that? We can get rid of them. How? It's easy. Stop hiring them. In all my family court vlogs, my views and opinions are entirely my own. please help me by liking, sharing, subscribing and hit that notification bell. I do, however, need to explain, for avoidance of doubt, that I am not telling you what to do in your case. This is just a fictional example of the hate that I read pretty much every day. And this vlog is for entertainment purposes only. Because let's face it, destroying your ex and their relationship with your child with the unwavering support of the broken, inept and incomprehensible family court is indeed great fun and entertaining. So, let's get started, and you should have part 1 of the statement in front of you, and I trust that you have read it through at least once. Now, remember, this entire statement is based only on a handful of alleged behaviours by Matthew within their 8-year marriage. We will be, in part 1, presenting the first 4 in this masterclass of how to write a statement of hate with absolutely no evidence needed. Let's take a look at the first 4 spurious allegations. Number 1, that Mr. Matthew Groves controlled Mrs. Abigail Groves and her friends. Number 2, that Mr. Groves monitored Mrs. Groves using a camera doorbell. Number 3, that Mr. Groves once looked at Mrs. Groves in anger and clenched his fists. Number 4, that Mr. Groves called Mrs. Groves Petri, a reference to a COVID Petri dish, and called her a COVID factory. I am not condoning any of these alleged incidents. That's not the point. This is about how Abigail, or indeed any vindictive resident parent, with the clever use of words, can twist, manipulate and distort events without any evidence to push all those family court buttons and fire that starting pistol on a family court domestic abuse and coercive control witch hunt on their ex. Let's start then with a statement and the background. The applicant, Mr. Groves, and I were married 8 years ago. We have a daughter of the marriage, Sandy, who is 4 years of age. Sandy has commenced nursery at Better Kids Nursery in Stanford. The applicant left the marital home 3 months ago, as the marriage has irretrievably broken down due to the domestic abuse and coercive control suffered by myself, which has also impacted on the safety and welfare of Sandy. On Mr. Groves leaving the matrimonial home, I contacted social services, who advised me that I had responsibility to ensure that Sandy was safe, and I therefore stopped all contact. I was then constantly pestered and harassed by the applicant into attending mediation, which I declined, being a survivor of domestic abuse and coercive control. I do not believe that contact between the applicant and Sandy would be safe, or indeed for myself to be in the presence of the applicant. No surprises there then. A fairly classic and common first move to take possession and ownership of Sandy, putting Matthew Groves on the back foot with a target on his back for everything that she now wants to throw at him in terms of spurious and vindictive allegations. So let's make a start with the first allegation: control over Abigail and her friends. Paragraph 1.1. The marriage ended because of Matthew's controlling, abusive and coercive behaviour. He even made me feel as if the end of the marriage was my fault, and that I had failed as a wife, although in reality I was coming to terms with the fact that I was a victim and survivor of abuse. That's a brilliant start. You see, Abigail introduces the fact that Matthew is coercively controlling without explaining why. And in the same paragraph also throws in the notion of victim blaming, that she was made to feel that the marriage breakdown was her fault. She refers to herself as a victim and survivor. That sets the scene perfectly. All the right trigger words are in all the right places. Right from the start, the impression is given that Mr. Groves is clearly the primary perpetrator of domestic abuse. Back to the statement. Even before we married, my friends warned me by asking if I was sure. They could clearly see something at that time that I could not. However, I realise now that he had already controlled me. He showered me with compliments and gave me gifts. But now I understand that this was all part of his manipulation. And as soon as we were married, that is when it started to feel like he owned me. During the marriage, Mr. Groves controlled who I could see. He once said that he did not like my best friend Becky coming around the house because he thought that we would talk about him and that Becky was a bad influence. Becky was single and wanted me to occasionally go out with her to nightclubs. Matthew was jealous, and although he did not prevent me, he would set a time for me to come home by 3 a.m. And when I got home, he would be awake in bed waiting for me. I felt constantly controlled and watched. Well, what more proof do you need that Mr. Groves is an abuser? When you give your wife compliments and gifts, that's manipulation and control. I never knew that. You must like your wife's friends because if you don't, that's pressurizing and alienating her. Abigail also wanted a single life. People will have different views on that. But Matthew being awake when she gets back at 3 a.m, that's clearly controversial. You see, when it comes to coercive control, all these things are very important because the court is looking under every stone, in every nook and cranny, for a pattern of behaviour. And Abigail is well on her way to leaving those breadcrumbs for the judges from Planet Stupid to pick up. Let's now take a look at allegation number 2, monitoring Abigail with a camera doorbell. In 2019, Matthew installed a video camera doorbell to the front door. There was no side or back gate to the house, so that the only entry and exit point was via the front door. The doorbell camera was set to record on detecting any movement and was connected to his laptop and what he described as the cloud. I don't really understand what this means, and he never explained it to me. I believe that this was his way of monitoring what I was doing during the day when he was at work and I was at home with Sandy, or on my own when Sandy was at nursery. I was convinced that he would know or receive an alert when the doorbell was activated, and that by using his mobile phone that he could see me entering and leaving the house and could time how long I was away. Well, that's marvellous. The purchase and installation of a commonly accepted item, promoted even by the police as beneficial for home security, now on separation becomes an item of wife monitoring, surveillance, stalking and coercive control. Notice how Abigail states that he could monitor her leaving the home. I guess that is technically correct. That the whole purpose of the device is to see who is coming to the house. But it's a huge leap of faith to then say that he actually was. Where is the proof? The problem for Matthew, however, is that Just the suggestion made at the start of the family court proceedings will tick all the right potential victim boxes. The wording is brilliant because it sows that seed of possibility and deflects away from the fact that this is only a thought, a perception, an assertion which Abigail has not backed up with any evidence. However, the next paragraph then tempts you into thinking that there might be. Paragraph 2.5. Occasionally, when he got home, he would ask me if I had a good day and whether I had gone out. I believed that he was double checking on what I would say, as he already knew the answer. This caused me extreme psychological distress and anxiety. I felt that I was in a prison being monitored by CCTV. I hated it, but was too afraid to tell him, as I knew that if I did, he would just tell me that I was paranoid, stupid, and would laugh at me. I was constantly treading on eggshells in fear. That's the suggested evidence, folks. Mr. Groves has previously asked Abigail how her day was and if she had gone out, which means that he must only be asking her because he already knows. Because he monitors Abigail, and it's all one big trap to see if she lies. Ladies and gentlemen, this is just twisted logic. It's entirely irrational as an argument, but presented in such a brilliant way that it actually sounds plausible and evidential. Why? Because once again it's pressing all those woke, victimhood buttons. You know the script. Until proven otherwise, we have to believe alleged victims of domestic abuse at all times. And if we don't believe alleged victims of domestic abuse, then we must ourselves be in denial, and our thinking needs to be challenged and corrected by the family court thought police. The brilliance continues. Abigail states that she never complained because she said that she was too afraid to complain because of what she feared his reaction might be. But the reality is that we will never know what his reaction would have been because she never complained. There was never actually any reaction or abusive behaviour by Matthew. It is simply a fear that is manipulated into there being an abusive environment, which no doubt made her tread on eggshells. And notice she uses the expression, "I was convinced that," "I believe that." These are essential to use in statements that have no evidence, because they make it sound so convincing. How can you challenge and defend yourself against someone's belief and perceptions? My head is spinning with all the nonsensical, contorted logic. But once again, when presented with sincerity as a victim, those from Planet Stupid jump up and down in eagerness to embrace it. Returning to the statement, paragraph 2.6. I started to doubt my own sanity and would blame myself for thinking that I must be foolish or even unwell. That is the coercive control that he had on me. I was totally submissive. I could not speak out in any way. He was bigger than me physically, and I found that totally intimidating. Mrs. Groves is doubting her own sanity and claims to have been totally submissive, although there is no evidence or examples of her having been submissive. And Mr. Groves is even guilty of being physically bigger than her, which is intimidating. Let's just put Mr. Groves to the sword right now. Are you starting to dislike him as much as I am? If he is physically intimidating to Abigail, how physically intimidating must he be to poor, terrified, 4-year-old little Sandy. Let's now look at the allegation number 3, anger and intimidation, starting with paragraph 3.1. On one occasion, I cannot recall exactly what the argument was about or when it was, I challenged Matthew and he stood in front of me and looked at me with such anger and contempt that his face went red. I could see the veins in his neck and face bulge out. He had clenched his fists and I was in immediate fear that he was going to strike and hit me. He has never hit me before, but on this occasion I felt in total fear of my safety. I remember that Sandy was also in the room and she would have sensed the fear. I believe that she started to cry, and it was only when I was able to go and comfort her that saved me from potentially a very serious incident of domestic violence. This incident terrified me, and from that point on I learnt never to try and challenge him again. I accepted that I had to be submissive. 10 out of 10, grade A with a distinction for this one. This pushes the hate with spurious allegations along very nicely, with the inferred threat and fear of violence, with the icing on the cake and a cherry on top being an inferred threat and fear of violence in the presence of Sandy. What poetry, theatre and drama, all wrapped up together, and Abigail even showing herself to be the one to protect, rescue and care for Sandy. What a heroic gesture. Abigail, the saviour, the child protector, the righteous one. Marvellous stuff. But let's rewind slightly and see what we actually have here. We have an allegation of potential violence without any violence. We have a vivid description of swelling veins. Perhaps that's the family called Viagra taking effect. We have a child being rescued from an incident that they don't need rescuing from. And it's all happened on a date and time that hasn't been determined. Is this yet another well-crafted example of an allegation that Mr. Groves can't possibly defend himself against? Because nothing actually happened. It doesn't get more perfect than that. Moving on to allegation 4, that Abigail was called Petri and a COVID factory when she had COVID. In June 2021 I had COVID and Matthew called me insulting and disparaging names. On one occasion he called me Petri, which was a reference to a Petri dish, and also called me a COVID factory. This was very cruel and I felt unsupported, an object of humiliation whilst being very unwell, particularly with people going into hospital, being put on ventilators with the possibility of dying. It was a terrifying experience, and he showed himself for the uncaring and insensitive man that he is and always has been, and how he coercively controlled me throughout the marriage with degrading comments. Wow, that all sounds very dramatic, but it reads as if Abigail, like most other people now on planet Earth, has inevitably caught COVID. But that she didn't actually end up in hospital. It doesn't explain what being very unwell means. The word cruel is an exceptionally good word to use in this situation, being defined as willfully causing pain or suffering to others or feeling no concern about it. Was Mr. Groves being cruel? I don't know. He might have been. But what happens if you remove the word cruel and instead replace it with Matthew, in order to make me smile and try and cheer me up whilst feeling poorly, made a light-hearted comment that I was a COVID factory and called me Petri. That made me smile. You see, no one will ever know How can you evidence expression, perceptions and intent? Abigail can state her truth the way she wishes to, and there doesn't have to be any evidence at all. Genius. Moving on to paragraph 4.3. He tried to make me feel guilty, as if it was my fault that I had caught COVID and that I could potentially spread it to him. I was terrified that if he caught it, then he would blame me and would try and make my life a misery. I was treading on eggshells, praying that only I would be infected so as not to cause his rage and anger to flare up. It caused an atmosphere of fear in the house and was also detrimental to the welfare of Sandy. Well, if you keep repeating something over and over again, then it must be true. In the previous allegation, Abigail mentions anger and intimidation, but now she escalates this to introduce fear of his rage. But hold on, her entire assertion in relation to Matthew's anger was that he looked at her in an angry manner. So where does the rage now fit in? Oh, silly me, I forgot. I'm trying to look at this logically and rationally. Abigail and her sick lawyer aren't worried about rational arguments and evidence. They just want to cause that sense of high drama, fear, abuse, danger, threats, intimidation, coercion, control, anxieties, risk, vulnerability, submission, concerns, alarm, apprehension, menace, peril, cruelty, disorder and disturbance. Abigail and Sandy are not safe and contact must be minimised, restricted or better still denied until all this can be sorted out, which is likely to take months and months and months. The last paragraph, 4.4. Even with COVID, I had to look after Sandy. Matthew did nothing to help. We all had to self-isolate together, and this made me realise once and for all that the marriage could not go on. He was so uncaring, unsupportive and insensitive. Oh, and whilst we are at it, let's take a left hook to Matthew's personality and parenting. Ladies and gentlemen, you must be exhausted. So this is a wonderful moment to take a breather as I bring to an end part 1 of this masterclass on how to write a brilliant statement of hate with absolutely no evidence whatsoever. I would like to bring back Abigail Groves with a round of applause to thank her for sharing her thoughts, experiences and her statement with us. I'm not sure that a sick-in-the-head lawyer who helped her write it would approve me giving away all the trade secrets. But exposing the broken, inept, incompetent and incomprehensible family court system is what I enjoy doing. And whilst we are at it, let's also acknowledge Mr. Matthew Groves. We are learning so much from his pain, suffering and humiliation. This has been so much fun, so please join me for part 2 where you will be able to download the next part of Abigail's statement and read along with Phil again. See you soon.